What? We're not live.
We are now. Senate will please come to order. We will have a brief moment of silence as we prepare for our long floor session and wish the best to our finance and appropriations committees to finish their work by the end of the day as well. Thank you. Are there any announcements? Seeing none, we have two bills for referral under Rule 31, the first being S-259. 259 affecting the expenditures of the state will be referred to the Committee on Appropriations, and S-310 also affecting the expenditures of the state will be referred to the Committee on Appropriations. We have a number of House bills for reference this morning. The first being H-173, which passed the House on March 19th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H-173, an act relating to prohibiting manipulating a child for the purpose of sexual contact.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Judiciary. Our next bill is H-233, which passed the House on March 20th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H-233, an act relating to licensure and regulation of pharmacy benefit managers.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Health and Welfare. We have H-279, which passed the House on March 20th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H-279, an act relating to the Uniform Trust Decanting Act.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Judiciary. We have H-350, which passed the House on March 20th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H-350, an act relating to the Uniform Directed Trust Act.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Judiciary. We have H-606, which passed the House on March 20th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H-606, an act relating to professional licensure and immigration status.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Government Operations. Could the door keep, please just mention to the folks outside the door that it's quite loud out there. We have H-614, which passed the House on March 20th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H-614, an act relating to land improvement fraud and timber trespass.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill. It is also referred to the Committee on Judiciary. We have H-644, which passed the House on March 20th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill by title.
H-644, an act relating to access to records by individuals who are in foster care.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Government Operations. We have H-664. Hold on one second. We have H-664, which passed the House on March 20th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H-664, an act relating to designating a state mushroom.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Agriculture. We have H-667, which passed the House on March 20th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H-667, an act relating to the creation of the Vermont Ireland Trade Commission.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Government Operations. We have H-741, which passed the House on March 20th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H-741, an act relating to health insurance coverage for colorectal cancer screening.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bill is referred to the Committee on Health and Welfare. We have H-794, which passed the House also on March 20th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H 794, an act relating to services provided by the Vermont Veterans Home.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bills referred to the Committee on Government Operations. We have H 867, which passed the House on March 20th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H 867, an act relating to miscellaneous amendments to the laws governing alcoholic beverages and the Board of Liquor and Lottery.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bills referred to the Committee on Economic Development, Housing, and General Affairs. And we have H 868, which passed the House on March 20th. Please listen to the first reading of the bill.
H 868, an act relating to fiscal year 2025 transportation program and miscellaneous changes to laws related to transportation.
Now you've heard the first reading of the bills referred to the Committee on Transportation. That brings us to the orders of the day. We are going to briefly bounce around and start with S-258. S-258 was read for the first time and referred to the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy, which considered the same and recommends that when the bill is amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which considered the same and also recommends that when the bill is amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S 258, an act relating to the management of fish and wildlife.
And just for reference, you can find that on page 1363 of today's House calendar for the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy, the senator from Addison.
Again, I'm reporting on Bill S-258, relating to Fish and Wildlife. And again, it appears on your calendar beginning on page 1363. I'm going to review the full bill and not spend too much time on some of the details because on page 1373, there's an amendment which makes a substantial number of changes, things that are either amended or entirely withdrawn from the underlying bill. So this bill, is the year 16 for me in the legislature, and I'd say more than any other bill I've ever worked on is a bit of a Rorschach or inkblot test, because what people have seen in the bill is what they have brought to the bill more than a response necessarily to the language in the bill. I've heard many statements about things it would do that have never been part of the bill in any way. And sometimes I think about what's the most important word. It may not be in the bill, but what's the most important word underneath the whole piece of work we're doing? And for me, that word is respect. I have, and the committee has, a respect for the very positive traditions of hunting in Vermont. This bill is not an anti-hunting bill in any way. As a matter of fact, when I have friends and neighbors who take deer on a regular basis, and perhaps one of the most respectful things you could do with an animal that you've taken is to literally consume it. It becomes part of you for some period of time, maybe years. So that, I think, is a respectful relationship and a quiet but foundational piece of the way we're thinking as we go into the bill. We also want to acknowledge that there are people in the hunting and non-hunting, and we all live together. And the goal is to have tolerant, civil discussions. We all just went to town meeting and had many such conversations all over the state. And although there have been passions on both sides about this bill, I hope that people will slow down, settle down, and think about it in an intolerant way, realize we all want to live together. And literally, when I hear from people on both sides of the issue talking passionately about wildlife, healthy habitat, conservation, those are all completely shared values. There's much more that people have in common than divides them. So again, the bill has always been for something, a better process for placing people on the board. So the bill proposes in the original and is modified greatly in the proposed amendment, the composition and appointment process for the Fish and Wildlife Board, so that it might begin to include, as it does not now, Vermonters who are part of the 90.1% of the citizenry who do not hold hunting licenses. In short, it seeks to make the board more democratic in the straightforward sense that an elected or appointed body should reflect the views of the people it represents. Secondly, it supports a respectful and appropriate means of taking coyotes through trapping and hunting, and ways to reduce conflicts between those taking and the rest of the public. Again, just very briefly, I've received an impressive number of messages, maybe you have too, and many of them, unfortunately, have been based on misunderstandings of what the bill actually does. So again, it's a positive thinking bill, it's not negative. It doesn't include, never has, an end to trapping, hunting, fishing, etc. And one last reminder about coyotes. We'll get into it later. They are currently open to taking 365 days a year and remain so in the bill. And you can trap coyotes as well. So that is also unchanged. So turning to the bill itself, page 1373, in section 1, we revised the Fish and Wildlife Board in 2 ways. The method of appointment, currently it's 14, all by the governor, 1 per county. The proposal here, which will be amended later, was to split appointments 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, administration, House, Senate. It makes the board, secondly, it makes the board advisory and returns the rulemaking authority to the department led by the commissioner. The section also seeks to create for the first time some qualifications for appointment to the board in an effort to both broaden the membership and to seek qualified members. It provides training to all members because currently people come on. One of the things we're aiming for is improved knowledge that will lead to better advice in working with the commissioner. There's training that's provided to all members of the board. Next thing to just highlight is that the rules, so the people have worried about the scope of what the board would be involved in. The only trigger to bring material before this board for discussion and advice is rulemaking led by the commissioner. That is the door into that conversation. All the other policies, programs, and work of the Fish and Wildlife Department proceed as they do currently. So again, the rules, and only the rules, are presented to the board for comment, which is very much akin to our standard practice under the Administrative Procedures Act. And just very briefly, an expansion of the board, including more voices that best represent the range of interests, is again based on the notion that we are all stewards of this shared natural resource. And I'd like to share some information from the department itself that supports the bringing together of voices of hunters and non-hunters alike. If I may, Mr. President, I'd like to read from the Fish and Wildlife Department's report to the Vermont Legislature on statewide coyote populations issued by former Commissioner Porter in 2018.
Without objection, you may.
First, it's a great read, and I would encourage people who are really interested in this issue to dig into it. In the language of the department, it talks about 2 populations out there, quote unquote, traditionalists and mutualists. Traditionalists being sort of a shorthand for wildlife are there for our benefit. So taking that's our interest in it. Mutualists are, a short definition might be wildlife are there, yes, for our taking, but also we need to learn to live with them and support that population. So just a different focus. I'm not ascribing benefits to one over the other. Of course, in Vermont, there are both. So secondly, using those terms, back to the monograph to quote, thankfully, in Vermont, there is significant overlap between the 2 points of view in that both groups generally value wildlife and support conservation of species. In a 2015 report, a public survey, 91% of all citizens thought it was important that people have the opportunity to participate in wildlife-related outdoor recreation, such as hunting, fishing, and wildlife viewing. A little further in the report, bringing these disparate groups together and building communication and respect under the umbrella of conservation is a huge challenge because it requires compromise in finding common ground, but it is one that is necessary to the future of wildlife. This is the department speaking. Fourth, there's a warning attached. Vilifying and undermining each other groups will only serve to slow the process. And so I'll leave there. So this responds to a 2018 analysis on the part of the department that these voices ought to be brought together while acknowledging that it's not easy. Returning to the bill. So, and again, just to be specific, I'm not saying the Fish and Wildlife Department recommended the specific changes that are in this bill, but they expressed support for and a belief that is necessary for the future of wildlife, that we make changes that accomplish a similar end. Going to section 2 on page 1365, it addresses the public trust issue I mentioned at the outset. Again, you'll see language here from 10 VSA 4081. It's provided by Chapter 2, Section 67 of the Constitution of the State of Vermont. The fish and wildlife of Vermont are held in trust by the state for the benefit of the citizens of Vermont and shall not be reduced to a private ownership. The state of Vermont, in its sovereign capacity as a trustee for the citizens of the state, shall have ownership, jurisdiction, and control of all fish and wildlife. So again, it's trust where the government is the trustee on behalf of every Vermonter, not just a subset of Vermonters. And in fact, we serve as trustees here in this room and in this body in order to enact that stewardship obligation. I would like to refer again to a Fish and Wildlife document, and that is, just a moment, please.
Without objection, you may when you find it.
It is the same document I was referring to before. And it talks about the foundations of the Fish and Wildlife Department's view of its task and the way it relates to fish and wildlife. And it espouses the North American model of conservation. In this model, there are 7 tenets, principles, but central to the model is, reading from the document, central to the model is the public trust document. The idea that wildlife is owned by everyone and held and managed in trust for future generations by the government. So by us on behalf of everyone. Secondly, I'll mention the 4th tenet in that model, quote unquote, wildlife can only be killed for a legitimate purpose. And we'll come back to that later. Again, returning to section 2, 1365, and second part is that there is a rule dating to the 1990s that the commissioners write a non-game management plan on a basis not less than every 5 years. The most recent rule we've been able to obtain is, I think, dated 2001. So out of date and out of sync with that statutory requirement. But this isn't about fussing about dates. In years, we've seen significant changes in climate and our understanding of climate, pressures on habitat and pressures on species, invasive species. species extinctions. So it's important, we believe, to revise that game management plan and bring it up to date. In balance sections 2 and 3, the bill makes conforming, the balance in 2 and in section 3, the bill makes conforming changes when rulemaking is mentioned, replacing Fish and Wildlife Board, current rulemaking body, with the department, where all rulemaking will be led by the commissioner. Why the commissioner? Why shift to the department? So the first thing I want to say is that we have nothing but admiration and praise for the department itself. There's never been any question in the minds of the committee, those working on the bill, that they have we have dedicated professionals who have spent entire careers, for instance, in wildlife biology. And the bill points to the need to manage wildlife using the best possible science and information available. We know that that resides in the department, and so we are comfortable and urge the body to support having the professionals move to lead on the development of rules. One of the shorthands for the bill is, from my mind, that we're willing to rely on science, not sentiment, pro or con on any issue in order to manage. And also having the board change to an advisory board is an entirely ordinary and traditional relationship. We have many hundreds of boards. When we have the agencies, the full-time professionals do the rulemaking, and then we have those boards advised by the citizens as well. In section 4, page 1368, we clarify explicitly what's already implicit in the bill, namely that the rulemaking the commissioner will bring to the board for review and comment does not include threatened and endangered species, which is now and remains distinct under the management of the secretary. So never was going to be caught up by this bill, but in order to provide more clarity, we were more explicit, and we identify that because it's already under the management of the secretary. It has never been under the commissioner. Section 5 is more conforming changes, basically with board moving to department. Section 6 is conforming change in B on Title 3 boards. Currently, there's only 2 boards with lawmaking or authority, actually, under ANR. One is the NRB, which is quasi-judicial and quite unique. And then this board as an outlier. So we remove this board from that list. Section 7 on 1369, more conforming changes as listed. Section 8 provides for the orderly transition to the newly appointed board. Section 9 is the first section that proposes changes on the certified objections of LCAR this past November. So I just want to highlight, LCAR highlighted some issues for us. It's not we are in no way just responding to those. We've been taking testimony related to these issues for years. However, I'm going to pause to talk about the LCAR thing only to say how unusual it is to have certified objections going to the Secretary of State and then have that rule put into force. So for the period 2000 to 2024, approximately 2,800 rules have come through LCAR, only 27 which have had certified objections. Of those, a subset, 17, have actually gone into force. So that is 0.4%. In other words, 99.6% of rules are never in this situation. It is an unusual situation. And given our responsibilities around delegated authority, when we see a rule that is such an outlier in terms of how it's been reviewed by the General Assembly through the LCAR process, I think we have not just good cause, but a compelling reason to propose changes. Section 10, 1371, 2 more LCAR corrections the committee believes are merited. That was definitions related to trails and definition related to setbacks of trapping from trails. Section as well as from playgrounds. And other places where the public may reasonably be expected to recreate. Section 11 on 1371, conforming changes so that the rule, if the statute were passed into law, will be edited so that it would comport with law. We would want to have the public go read a rule, think that they're being compliant with the rule, only to have to learn later that statute was at variance with that rule. So that can happen. So we say, let's do the public a favor. When we pass the statute, let's go back and clean up the rule so that the two are in sync and no one is misled. Section 12 makes permanent the coyote hunting with hounds moratorium that we had for the last 2 years and clarifies that bait can still be used, but used as part of trapping. Section 13 on 1372, additional cleanup and conforming changes in rules, and section 14 are the effective dates. So that I'd like to turn to the amendment, which begins on page 1373.
Actually, Senator, I don't think now would be the time to address your amendment on the next page you're talking about, as opposed to the committee amendment.
Oh, yes.
Because we have a
Thank
process
you.
we've got
We
to
have a
go through here first with respect to the report from the committees on, I've got to find my chart here, but on appropriations.
Thank you. So often speaking to a bill and an amendment that I just rolled right from one.
It's okay. The bill was then referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which is considered the same for the report of the Committee on Appropriations, Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. Committee on Appropriations did not review the policy that is included within the proposed bill. We did look at the fiscal implications of the bill, and with the increased number of one on the board would be $400. And we felt that was a de minimis effect in the budget. We'll consider it going forward. Thank you, Mr. President. The vote was 4-1.
And now there is an amendment to be offered to the committee amendment. So the Senator from Addison.
Thank you, Mr. President. We are going to be offering an amendment which the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee reports on a vote of 500. The amendment, again, appears in the calendar beginning on page 1373. We have been listening to concerns and issues for years on this body of provisions that are in the current bill and the draft amendment. We've had intensive conversations for since January on this, and we've made many adjustments along the way to address concerns, even in the bill that I just reviewed with you in the calendar. In the weeks subsequent to passing the bill out of committee, those committee discussions have continued, and so we're offering an amendment that we hope will buy some relief for people who have concerns and allow them to support the bill. So beginning on the bottom of 1370, in the first instance, we strike out provisions in the current bill and redefine some aspects here. So on 1374, the first major concern we heard was that the Fish and Wildlife Department is an executive branch department, and therefore the executive branch ought to be in charge of making appointments to such a board. That's a reasonable thing to say. We do have many boards which include, as you well know, appointments by the General Assembly, but given the concerns, we were responsive. The governor currently has 14 appointees, one per county. The amendment changes the appointment structure that I reviewed briefly before and returns to 14 appointees named by the governor. We add 2 additional appointees and one is made by the Senate and one is made by the House. Current former language tried to identify in certain terms who we wanted to have on a board that more fully reflected the range of values, of interests, and wildlife in the state. And we went through, frankly, some sort of awkward terms, using consumptive, non-consumptive. There were concerns about the language being discriminatory, et cetera. We moved on to looking at license holding, non-license holding. But there are many people who have a lifetime license. They may not have hunted in a long period of time. They're still a license holder, and they have great knowledge about wildlife biology, ecology, healthy environment, et cetera. We wouldn't want to exclude them on the basis of a criterion. So we turned the appointing and criterion for appointment around to make them all positive, and I'm hoping that everyone will see the positivity in these now. So 1374, in order to be appointed to the board, a person shall apply in writing to the appointing authority. The appointing authority shall give due consideration to appointing persons who, and then we have 3 criteria here. So 1, have a history of involvement with and dedication to fish and wildlife, including a knowledge of fish and wildlife biology, ecology, and the ethics of fish and wildlife management. B, provide balanced viewpoints. You want a range of voices at the table. C, recognize the challenges to wildlife and habitat caused by climate change, including an unprecedented loss of biodiversity, and prioritize the value of science in the work to conserve, protect, and restore natural ecosystems. So again, we lean into experience, balance, and knowledge that science in making determinations around the conservation, protection, and restoration of ecosystems. So all of these I've heard from all parties are a shared value and useful knowledge for any member of that board. But in order to help ensure that the board is well-equipped to deal with issues that might come before it, we, for the first time, include a training provision. So at the bottom of 1374, subsection C, upon appointment, each board member shall receive training from the department on wildlife management and training hunting ethics, such as the North American model of wildlife conservation, which I was citing before, and which the department has already been citing as a foundational document for its approach to the work. In addition, that training will include wildlife biology, coexistence with wildlife, the reduction of conflict between humans and wildlife, and the impacts of climate change on fish and wildlife. So that's it. We're trying to build a more robust board in that way. D, the language is substantially equivalent to the original language, but to review and reassure folks who believe that all the work of the commissioner might be brought to this board, and that could be burdensome to her or his work as a commissioner and helping manage the department. Again, there's a single criterion that triggers coming to the board, and that's rulemaking. Second instance of amendment. You'll see again what it's a change that we've talked about already. The board becomes the department. And there's an underlying sentence at the bottom of sub A. Again, to put the emphasis on science, not sentiment, that this board shall be supported by the best science available through the department and peer-reviewed research. The third instance of amendment clarifies and more explicit that the commissioner consults with the Endangered Species Committee as she or he works, but it's consultation. There's not a binding relationship between that consultation and any rulemaking the commissioner is bringing forward. The fourth instance amendment strikes out sections 9, 10, and 11 on trapping, definitions, and setbacks in their entireties. And then the remaining sections of the bill are renumbered to be
Moment. We're gonna have to take a brief recess to figure out our technology problems. I apologize. Senate will please come to order. Hopefully we resolve technical issues. We will probably find out soon enough. Senator from Addison, I believe you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I was about to conclude, so just since we have interrupted the in response to concerns I took particularly from senators in the last 2 weeks, we've made major adjustments to the bill. In short, we reduced the number of legislative appointees from 10 to 2. We reinstated the full 14 number of appointments to the governor directly. We also went through and removed trapping and trails language in the bill, and we kept the moratorium on hunting coyotes. So thank you, and to discussion.
So the question is, shall the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy be amended as offered by the Senator from Addison, Senator from Chittenden Southeast?
Thank you, Mr. President. On behalf of appropriations, we considered the bill. We did not consider the amendment. The addition of one member to the board would add another $400. And in consultation with the chair, we believe that this would be de minimis effect. So thank you, Mr. President.
So the question is, shall the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy be amended as offered by the Senator from Addison? Are you ready for the question? Senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise today to share some brief history and some of my experience with the Fish and Wildlife Department and the board. When I was, and as I get older, I remember things that happened earlier in my life better than I do with all these numbers going through my brain. But when I was a child, I started hunting and fishing with my grandfather and my father and my siblings when I was 8 years old. And my father used to take us, we weren't armed, but he used to take us hunting during the winter, and the winters were always colder back then. And I'm sure it was more like having a boat anchor going behind you. So, you know, they weren't always successful because they had kids behind them. But I can remember hunting deer and in Middletown Springs, Vermont, and we would see 80 deer a day. And we'd go the whole season, and if you saw one with horns, you were very lucky. So I can remember as a 13-year-old, we used to go with my father to the local, well, at the time it was Durham's Gun Shop, but now it would be called a sporting goods store, and listen to the old timers. Most of them were World War II and Korean War veterans. A lot of farmers came in and went there, and they would talk about the legislature, because at the time, the deer herd was managed by the legislature. And they were always complaining about the fact that the deer herd we had a lot of doe, and never saw any buck, and we needed to, you know, thin down the doe herd, because in the spring, we would go out and help with the dead deer surveys for the Fish and Game Department. At the time, it was Fish and Game. And we would always count the deer, the winter killed deer. So, and the old farmers would say, well, you don't manage the dairy herd by killing off the cows. So there was always a lot of back and forth on that between the legislature and the general population of hunters. And then I won't tell you the date, but under Edward Keyhole, one of the former commissioners of Fish and Game, he developed the Fish and Game Board. And what they did was they were able to wrestle control of the deer herd from the legislature and created this board of 14 members, one from each county, to have input into the actual management of the Fish and Game. And it's been successful, I think. Then recently, within the last 20 years, that board was renamed the Fish and Wildlife Board. When I was a young man, just right when I first got married, I worked for a dealership in my hometown of Pulteney, and the service manager was named Ray Burke, and he was a friend of Ed Kehoe's, and he was appointed to the board of Fish and Game. So the wrestling back and forth finally got involved with the department, got more biologists that were science informed, and they managed the herd. I think they've done an excellent job. The Fish and Wildlife Department now, in conjunction with the biologists and the Fish and Wildlife Board, have really done an excellent job. As a young man, I was a deputy state game warden. And we've seen the deer herd, if nothing else, improve because now the body size of the deer and the antler size are getting competitive with some of the other states that have successful management plans. So I really appreciate what the Fish and Wildlife, the Natural Resources and Energy Committee has done. But I really think that this bill is a solution in search of a problem. And I therefore urge my colleagues to vote no on this bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question is, shall the bill be amended, shall the report of the Committee on Natural Resources be amended as offered by the Senator from Addison, Senator from Essex?
Thank you, Mr. President. And this bill is the biggest anti-hunting bill that's ever reached the Senate, in my opinion. The biggest naturalists in this state are hunters. I can remember my father who hunted bear for over 40 years. And in those 40 years, he probably treed, I don't know, probably 40 to 60 bear a year. And in those 40 years, I bet that they didn't harvest more than 10 of those bear. Never a female, always a big male. Always something that probably wouldn't attribute to the decline of the population. And under the stewardship of that belief, the bear herd is the biggest herd. The bear population is the biggest population that it's ever been. And so you know, it's the hunters and themselves, a lot like what the board's made up, that have been very popular as far as making sure that the population of the wildlife in the state of Vermont has remained. The reporter of the bill talked about the science, but that's not how this bill started out. This bill started out as not science at all. It was only when, in my opinion, that as the bill got all kinds of tremendous activity from the public, that a search was committed to go around to find whatever it was going to get this bill to be able to pass. I guess that is politics. That's what we do. But I'm a little surprised that we have an amendment on the bill already after it's been voted out of committee. And I don't know. I guess I saw the vote on committee, but I wasn't aware that amendment really got taken back into committee and done the proper way. It just seems like we kind of rushed around here and asked everybody what it was going to take to be able to vote on this and to support the bill. Actually, no, I know this. Some of my fondest memories of my childhood have been in the woods with my grandfather, my father, my siblings. Again, as the senator from Rutland had said, we were anchors more than we were help, but our forebears really thought it was important that we would get out there, and that was long before. I mean, their concerns back then wasn't cell phones or video games or anything like that. It was just to get you out in nature and then have respect. And I can just the laughs, the stories that we tell still to this day. It's I think that's one thing that's kept the tradition of going to deer camp alive. As you go there and you hear the stories over and over and over again, and they never get old because it comes from your heart. It comes from your remembrance of people who have passed. It comes from the experiences that you lived by being out there. And it's funny, they were never stories about killing or harming or harvesting. They were just stories of people and families and traditions being held and being together and being as one. If this bill passes, this is the end of hunting as we know it in the state of Vermont. Because once they get rid of hounding with coyote hunting with hounds, they will go after bear hunting. And after they go after bear hunting, they're going to go after bobcat hunting. And then after they go after bobcat hunting, they're gonna go after fox hunting. And then they're gonna get rid of those pesky rabbit hunting. And that's the way it's gonna go. It's death by 1,000 cuts. There is not a problem with the way things are going right now. Everybody's happy. But for some reason, we've decided that they're not, and so we come up with this bill. And to again, as the senator from Rutland said, solve a problem that isn't there. I understand this. I understand that maybe we don't have the votes today. But that doesn't mean that 79,415 people aren't going to have a say. And I would ask that if people don't believe that, go ask Peter Smith. Go ask Peter Smith about that. Peter Smith was elected by a majority and then went to Washington and forgot all about who elected him. And he was a one and done congressman from the state of Vermont, and largely because he went against the hunters in this state, and he had a very short career.
Senator from Bennington, what is your point of order?
Point of order, Mr. President, is this conversation has gotten to a point of threats. And it concerns me that this is on the Senate floor in a debate about a bill. And now we're hearing that people are going to lose re-election if they vote for this bill. I don't think that's appropriate conversation on the Senate floor. Thank you. Mr.
Thank you for raising point of order. I'm going to consult with Secretary for a moment. Senator, I found your point of order not well taken. However, I do think the senator from Essex might want to consider bringing their points more closely to the topic of the bill at hand, if possible.
Yep.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
So I'll continue, and thank you, Mr. President. So there are 79,415 people that are very, very concerned about this bill. And there are. We have gotten as many emails about this bill as we have S5, as we have of anything else. We have 2 times filled the State House full of people that have come down here and that were very, very concerned about this bill. They had meetings and they were there, and a lot of people didn't even know what they were here for. But at the end of the day, Mr. President, they were here to express their concerns that their traditions were going to be taken away of what they have enjoyed their whole lives. I will conclude that maybe we don't have the votes today, but I do think people will remember. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I interrogate the reporter of the bill?
Senator from Madison is interrogated as a reporter of the bill, of the amendment.
On page 1374, pretty much right in the middle of the page, is the qualifications or the process, if you will, for making application. In order to be appointed, a person shall apply to the appointing authority, whether that's the governor or Speaker of the House or Committee on Committees. How would someone know to apply? Are we advertising that now, or what would be the process? Do you know?
The bill makes no changes to the current process, I think, because of the ample interest in things like wildlife. There are, I think, many people who are interested in the board. I would expect that it wouldn't be a problem to have people apply.
So, Mr. President, I'll just further ask question, what occurs if no one applies? As unlikely as that may seem.
Well, I guess, I don't know. I'd have to think about that a little more. I don't think we did not anticipate the notion that no one would want to be on the board. And so just as we've been thinking and learning together as a group for months and weeks, be interested to think about that and perhaps bring a provision back before third reading that would address that problem.
I think,
Potential problem, however unlikely it might seem to us.
and on the contrary, has any thought been given to how we handle hundreds and hundreds of people applying?
Certainly, there's an appointment process, and we appoint, I'm not sure the total number of boards we have in the state of Vermont, but we have, many boards, many people applying, and there is a way under current procedures to handle applications, make appointments. I anticipate no unique situation related to this one that would not make it practicable.
Near the bottom of that page, Mr. President, is the requirement that each board member will receive training from the Department on Wildlife Management, Hunting Ethics, the North American Model of Wildlife Conservation, Wildlife Biology, the coexistence with wildlife, the reduction of conflict between humans and wildlife, and the impacts of climate change on fish and wildlife. To me, that sounds pretty costly and extensive, and I wonder, does that training exist today?
I believe it does. If you look at the expertise that is in with the department itself as of today, I believe every one of these topics could be adequately addressed by staff speaking to the board.
Is there any idea how long that might take a member to complete the training?
We are not prescriptive about how this training will be developed and addressed.
And is the intent to have board members update that training annually?
We're not prescriptive about, we lay out a general line of body of knowledge that should be shared with the board. The department, again, because of their expertise, I'll pause again to say, this board recognizes the expertise of the department. We've only had praise for the department's work, and we're actually hopeful that they will share more of that information with the board to enable it to be better informed and more helpful as an advisory panel.
I thank the senator. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Bennington.
President, I didn't plan to speak. I'm one of those who heard from constituents on both sides of this issue. I didn't hear from only one side. I think I heard 4 or 5 sides. I read the bill. I read the court decision that Judge Tomasi came up with regarding the administrative rules. I spent a lot of time on this. I was opposed to the bill. I went to the chair of the Natural Resources Committee and told him of my concerns. He helped to address those concerns in this amendment. Did he address all of them? No. But I had met with representatives of Vermont sportsman clubs. I've met with representatives of hunting groups. I've met with representatives from Protect Our Wildlife. I've met with people about this bill. I am going to vote for the amendment that's offered by the senator from Addison. I want to assure people that I didn't change my mind lightly. And my support for this bill came because I believe that having the board do the rules was wrong. I think that it's the right thing to do to have the Commissioner of Fish and Wildlife do the rules, just as I feel the same for the Education Board should not be doing the rules, but that's for a different day and a different bill. But I want to make clear, I am concerned about the bill in terms of the court decision and how that affects it, because in Judge Tomasi's decision, there was an injunction requested to hold up the rulemaking done by the Fish and Wildlife Board and Commission and what was adopted. And Judge Tomasi denied that injunction because he found that the rules did meet legislative intent. And when we get into that murky water, there may be some challenges coming. And I hope as this bill makes its way through the process, that those challenges can be answered. But again, I am concerned about that portion of the bill, which I believe is the sections towards the end of the bill that have to do with the rulemaking. With that, Mr. President, I thank you very much, and I thank the Natural Resources Committee for their reconsideration.
Question is, Senator from Rutland.
Thank you, Mr. President. This, following this bill, as I have back and forth, and with the release of version 3.4 to the public, just 24 hours prior to being voted on, I have another question. May I interrogate the reporter of the bill?
The senator from Addison is interrogated as both the presenter of the amendment, the reporter of the bill, but also, so in either case, yes.
The reporter of the bill. Thank you. So I'm having difficulty understanding the need for the bill. Can the presenter share with the body what the Fish and Wildlife Board or department has failed to do or failed to do that regarding this bill? Why would you want to place all the decision-making power in the process with the commissioner? I mean, this is going back to putting the Fish and Wildlife of Vermont back in the control of the legislature. Because if the commissioner is appointed by the governor, then he's going to have all the decision-making process available to him.
The board is, we're aiming for enhanced performance of a board to advise the commissioner. It's hard for me actually to understand a concern about asking the head of a professional department to lead rulemaking. That's the normal situation across dozens and dozens of boards, agencies, departments, etc. We have, again, nothing but praise for the department. Bringing rulemaking back into the department feels like a secure way of making rules that, as I said before, when we found it on science, not sentiment. The bill itself adds another provision to be explicit about it. It says that the rules shall use the best available peer-reviewed science. And the word science appears repeatedly throughout the bill to emphasize just that sort of management.
Thank you, Mr. President. One further question, if I might, is, you said in the amendment that biodiversity and I think the original bill talked about climate change and the effect it was going to have on the wildlife was going to be adverse. I beg to differ with that information, because what's going to happen is the fish and wildlife and the non-game species are all going to prosper from the warmer climate. I can remember, as I mentioned, that we used to do the dead deer surveys in the spring, and it was amazing the number of deers that died because of the severe winter. So what's going to happen is the population of the fish and wildlife are going to increase, and if we ever do away with hunting and the proper control and management of the wildlife and the game animals, then we're going to have professional hunters and come in to control the population, or they're going to die from starvation and disease. Similar to what happened in Massachusetts. So did you take any of that into consideration when you we're making this a bill?
Yes, Mr. President. I would highly recommend Elizabeth Colbert's book, The Sixth Great Extinction. We're in a period of unprecedented change. Things that used to happen in geologic time are happening within people's lifetimes. Species are changing. We're losing species at a record rate, and invasive species, animal and plants alike, are coming into the state. It's changing the biology and the relationships between pre-existing species and those that arrive. So being attentive to the impacts of climate change on our wildlife and their habitats, both are in this bill, seems essential.
from everything I've seen, the species in Vermont are prospering. So I thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to assure the body that I believe this bill and the amendment to this bill proceeded exactly according to the process we might prefer if given our druthers. In other words, the committee produced a bill. There was among senators some lingering concerns, so attention was given to those concerns. And I just want to stress that what we're talking about now in the amendment, the original bill, if you think about it, was here. Doing nothing would be here. We're in the middle now. And that, I think, is where we find a lot of compromise and a lot of way to move forward. So to reiterate, the original bill had the governor's 14 appointments being reduced to 5. We heard concerns about that. And in the amendment, it is scaled back so that the governor retains all 14 appointments. It simply adds 1 from the House, 1 from the Senate. That is not even a healthy minority. That is a voice that's being added to a board that will otherwise be dominated by the governor's appointees. And the amendment makes it clear that the committee is fine with that. They're hoping just to get those 2 voices out of 16. So that's 1 out of 8 would be from the legislature. The other thing I want to stress is that trapping is removed completely from the bill. So the committee, I believe, rightly heard concerns about some of the trapping provisions. And so they have eliminated that. That's a haircut to their work. And it's not an easy thing for a committee to accept that. But I think they've done so in the spirit of reaching compromise. So I want to say that I appreciate the extra work on the committee's part. I appreciate senators who, from all sides of this dispute, made their voices heard. But I think the amendment is of the possible outcomes. It is a desirable outcome. It will be a better board. It will be a more effective board, I believe. And I'm comfortable having rulemaking in the hands of the commissioner himself. Thank you, Mr. President.
Just for clarity, I'm going to restate the question. I will recognize you in a moment. We are currently discussing 2 amendments. There's an amendment from the committee, which is called the report of the committee. There's the amendment being offered by the senator from Addison. So the current conversation, which was still appropriate, but just terminology, is the amendment from the senator from Addison to amend the report, or otherwise known as the amendment of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy. Senator from Chittenden North.
Thank you, Mr. President. I do not hunt, nor did I move to Vermont with the expectation or desire to turn Vermont into the place of my birth. Nor do I have to agree with someone's lifestyle in order to vote to protect it. I don't have to understand someone's hobby in order to allow it. Mr. President, may I inquire of the presenter of the amendment?
The senator from Addison is interrogated.
Mr. President, is it true that the new coyote hunting regulations went into effect this calendar year?
That is correct. A rule was brought to Elkhart late 2023, and I discussed the process. The majority of the rule was approved, but Elkhart certified 4 objections to the Secretary of State.
Thank you. Given that short time frame in which data could be gathered and considered about how those rule changes took effect on those who hunt using hounds, what data did the committee use in order to outlaw this method of hunting?
Can you please repeat the question? I'm just trying to
Sure.
make sure I'm responsive. I'm not sure I understood it.
Given the short runway of time, for example, between January and March, in which we had this new rule or rules in effect about hound hunting of coyotes, what data did the committee use to decide to outlaw it?
Thank you for the question. So this issue of the use of hounds in coyote hunting has been in the committee for years. So we've had ample discussion that predated the recent events at Elkhart and the discussion there. But, and I would say, for instance, some of the data we used actually comes from the Fish and Wildlife Department itself. If I may, Mr. President, I would like to cite the department's data.
Without
Part of our
objection, you may.
consideration. There's a publication called Eastern Coyote Issues, A Closer Look. And in that document, it's not long, but I'll be selective. The Fish and Wildlife Department believes that both predators and prey species are vital components in a healthy ecosystem. Deer and other prey species evolve with predators, and as such, we neither regard predators as undesirable, nor do we view them as a significant threat to game populations. In fact, predators can help maintain prey populations at a level that are in balance with their habitat. The population is estimated between 6,000 and 9,000 individuals, and it's unlikely to increase significantly beyond its current level. We do not believe that current hunting and trapping seasons impact the population in the long term. Further, when significant reductions in coyote numbers are locally achieved, the missing animals are soon replaced with young coyotes moving in from other locations, so that local population reduction is only short term. Coyotes can increase their reproductive rates in response to hunting, so populations quickly rebound from efforts to control their numbers directly by hunting and trapping. From a related document, they also go on to say, the Fish and Wildlife Department recognizes that people have many differing views on the value of predators. We believe, however, that coyotes are important members of the ecosystem and evolve together with many of nature's existing prey species. Conservation of the coyote is important to maintaining that ecosystem integrity because of the vital role they play as predators. Certain groups would like to decrease or eliminate the coyote population. While coyotes do kill other animals to eat and survive, including an occasional deer, they should not be subjected to extermination programs. Coyotes fill the role of a natural predator, and that role is important for maintaining the dynamics and health of our ecosystems. Expensive extermination and bounty programs were common in the past and were responsible, along with habitat loss, for the elimination of some natural predators throughout the US. These techniques have no place in modern wildlife management, which stresses the importance of all species. The practices that the committee has studied over time and learned more about, I would equate coyote hunting with hounds as part of an extermination program that is not in keeping, as the department says, with the management, the scientifically based management of the coyote population, which delivers benefits to the entire ecosystem in the state of Vermont.
Mr. President, did I just hear that coyote hunting with hounds is a method of trying to exterminate them? Because I was under the impression there were only 36 licenses for coyote hunting, and I don't know that 36 people times 4 hounds each could exterminate an entire coyote population, but please educate me.
Well, extermination, I suppose, is a more expansive term. I'm just quoting the Fish and Wildlife Department's position, and you can extend it at scale to programs that have people killing coyotes, and I would in the manner of hunting them with hounds.
I think the report, Mr. President, may I continue? I truly appreciate the recent changes made to gain support for this bill, several of which I asked for a while back, namely an even numbered board and who made which appointments. I do represent a rural district. I've listened hard to people who have felt unheard as this bill was drafted, because I have a very different lived experience from theirs. My vote will reflect, I hope, my ability to represent those conservationists who hunt, those who follow science as well as following tradition. Thank you.
Senator from Chittenden Central.
May I inquire of the presenter of the amendments?
The senator from Addison is interrogated as the presenter of the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Are coyotes considered an invasive species in Vermont?
Some people regard them as an invasive species, but the department itself, if I may, once again, quote from the department,
Without objection, you may.
although a recent addition to the state, the coyotes have adapted well to Vermont and play an important ecological role. The Vermont Fish and Wildlife Department does not consider the coyote an invasive species in our state. And some biologists may use the term naturalized to describe this important distinction.
I thank the senator, and I want to thank the committee for hearing some of my concerns about the original committee report and making changes to the bill. I'm not a hunter, but I grew up in a family of hunters. My brother is a hunter whom I have great respect for. And anytime we are taking up issues that I don't have a lot of knowledge about in the hunting arena, I take them to him. And he looked over this bill and had a couple of concerns, all of which relating to the fact that there weren't stronger efforts for conservation in the bill. He felt like the bill could be stronger. And so I do want to be careful when we broad brush speak for every person who hunts as being opposed to this bill to simply say that that is not true. As I spoke to the hunters in my family who do support this amendment and do support the underlying bill. So thank you.
Question is, shall the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy be amended as offered by the senator from Addison? Are you ready for the question?
Roll call.
A roll call has been requested by the senator from Rutland, a senior senator. The question is, shall the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy be amended as offered by the senator from Addison? Are you ready for the question? If so, the secretary shall commence to call the roll.
Senator Baruch.
Yes.
Senator Bray.
Yes.
Senator Brock.
Yes.
Senator Campion.
Yes.
Senator Chittenden.
Yes.
Senator Clarkson.
Yes.
Senator Collmore.
No.
Senator Cummings.
Yes.
Senator Gulick.
Yes.
Senator Hardy.
Yes.
Senator Harrison.
Yes.
Senator Hashim.
Yes.
Senator Ingalls.
No.
Senator Kitchell.
Yes.
Senator Lyons.
Yes.
Senator McDonald.
Yes.
Senator Mazza. Senator McCormick.
Yes.
Senator Norris.
No.
Senator Kirschlick.
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Sears.
Yes.
Senator Starr.
No.
Senator Duhovsky.
Yes.
Senator Watson.
Yes.
Senator Weeks.
No.
Senator Westman.
No.
Senator White.
Yes.
Senator Williams.
No.
Senator Renner.
No.
Senator Mazza.
Please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yea, 21, those voting nay, 8. And you have amended the report of the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay.
No.
The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. You have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Natural Resources and Energy as amended. Question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question?
Roll call.
Roll call has been requested by the senator from Franklin, senator from Windsor.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise in support of the bill. Game species are wildlife. The category game is a subcategory of the larger category wildlife. Hunters, trappers, fishers are people of Vermont. They are not the only people of Vermont. Hunters, trappers, fishers, consumptive users of wildlife are a subset of the larger group
the people. There are other Vermonters who do not hunt or who do not fish, but photograph, watch, just look out at the woods knowing that there's wildlife out there and deriving satisfaction from it. Not only are there factors of game species that are not game factors, but non-game factors. Wildlife has value of its own as well, intrinsic value, having nothing to do with its value to us as food or as sport. Sentient living creatures have dignity and value as well. The bill does not choose non-consumptive users over consumptive users. It does not exclude consumptive users. The bill includes people who are under the present regime excluded. I don't think anyone has ever gone to court on that issue, but the common benefits clause of the Vermont Constitution, in my personal view, is offended by that. And what this bill intends to do is to broaden the perspective and to broaden the franchise. I am deeply troubled, and I'm sure others are as well, that this discussion in some quarters has devolved into a culture war. My family settled in Bethel, Vermont in the 1880s. My grandfather was born and raised here. I was not, because typical of his generation, he left the state because he went to the bright lights. But by the time he inherited his parents' house, he was able to hold on to it. So I spent part of every summer of my life here and cried when we went home and knew when I was 5 years old, I would live my life in Vermont. And when I moved here, friends of my great-grandparents said, "Welcome home." And to find now that I am seen, by at least in some quarters, as disrespectful of native Vermonters, my native Vermont grandfather scolded me for idolizing Vermonters. And the bill does not disrespect the native Vermont culture. It does not disrespect native Vermonters. First of all, there are a lot of native Vermonters who support this bill. I know for a fact because I've heard from them. So I will be voting for the bill, and I hope my colleagues will as well. Thank you, Mr. President.
Question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, the secretary shall commence to call the roll.
Senator Baruch,
Yes.
Senator Bray,
Yes.
Senator Brock,
No.
Senator Campion,
Yes.
Senator Chittenden,
Yes.
Senator Clarkson,
Yes.
Senator Collmore,
No.
Senator Cummings,
Yes.
Senator Hewley,
Yes.
Senator Hardy,
Yes.
Senator Harrison,
Yes.
Senator Hashim,
Yes.
Senator Ingle,
No.
Senator Kitchell,
Yes.
Senator Lyons,
Yes.
Senator McDonald,
Yes.
Senator Mazza, Senator McCormick,
Yes.
Senator Norris, no. Senator Perschlick,
Yes.
Senator Ron Hinsdale,
Yes.
Senator Sears,
Yes.
Senator Starr,
No.
Senator Bihowski,
Yes.
Senator Watson,
Yes.
Senator Weeks,
No.
Senator Westman,
No.
Senator White,
Yes.
Senator Williams,
No.
Senator Renner,
Yes.
Senator Mazza,
Please listen to the results of your vote. Those voting yea, 21, those voting nay, 8. You've ordered third reading of S 258. We are now going to continue back to near the top of the calendar. We're passing over H 554, and we are taking up S 184. S 184 was read for the first time, referred to the Committee on Transportation, which considered the same and recommends that when the bill is amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill was then referred to Committee on Finance, which also recommends that when the bill is amended, the bill ought to pass. And the bill was then referred to Committee on Appropriations, who recommends that when the bill is amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S 184, an act related to the use of automated traffic law enforcement systems.
Now, you've heard the second reading of the bill. For the report of the Committee on Transportation, the Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. S 184 is a bill that's had several years in the making. I'd say it started in 2021, 3 years ago, for those keeping count. Your Committee on Transportation took up this issue of safety in work zones by the highway workers, in particular because that prior year there had been a flagger that's been hit and killed while working in a work zone. So the committee chair at the time had a lot of flaggers and workers come into the committee and talk about their experience trying to do the needed work that we need on our highways, paving jobs, culvert replacements. And there was pretty harrowing stories about having to jump out of the way into ditches. We had the mother from the man that was killed come in and talk about her son and the sad story of him liking this job, but then being killed by being hit by a vehicle. So we looked on what we could do to try to improve the safety in work zones. We looked at lighted stop paddles. We looked about how we do speed enforcement now. If you go through a work zone, you might often see a law enforcement vehicle there, often with the lights on. But those officers aren't there to do speed enforcement. They're there to give you a reminder that the speed should be lower in the work zone, but they're not actively measuring speeds. They're not pulling people over for speeding. And so the impact of that has been limited. Other thing that we learned is that like the workforce issues that we have kind of across the economy today, back then was being felt with law enforcement and in trying to hire people to work these jobs in highway constructions, particularly on the highway work zones where there's still high speeds going by. And so what could we looked at what we could do to improve the situation for these Vermonters that are working on our highways. So in 2022, we asked for a study, as we often do, but this one we really weren't sure. We wanted to know, we knew there was concerns about speed cameras. So we wanted the Agency of Transportation to work with a bunch of stakeholders that look at equity concerns, look at privacy concerns about using cameras. We had a lot of controversy in years past about the license plate readers program that we had. So we wanted them to look at those issues and come back to the legislature. So they issued this non-prop report, which is a very good report, I would say, 40 pages, that really looks at all the issues around specifically about using speed cameras in work zones. So they came back in we asked them 21, so 22, they came back with this study. And I'll say that the conclusion of the study starts with this sentence, but the study found that speed safety cameras will lower speeds in work zones, and that through careful process and procurement, the challenges associated with privacy and equity can be minimized. So after this report was issued in 22, we looked at having the agency was supportive based on their work on the report to do a pilot project or do a test project of speed cameras in work zones. We approved them moving forward on getting a grant from the Federal Highway Safety Program to implement this program. However, they found out that they couldn't move forward because the proposal at the time from the agency was to use the cameras for educational purposes only. So you would the camera would take a picture of your vehicle if you're speeding, but the thing that you would get in the mail wouldn't be a fee or a violation. It would just say, we measured your vehicle speeding, here's a picture of your vehicle, 0 fine, please slow down next time you go through a work zone. But when the agency applied for the grant, which they were pretty confident they would get, they were told, oh, you would get the grant, except we will not give you the grant if you're not assessing some kind of penalty, monetary penalty. You need to be making some kind of, not that is the revenue, but the federal highway safety program felt like that was a necessary part, or they wouldn't fund it. So that stopped the project happening that year. We didn't bring up the issue again in 23, but in 2024, we had this bill introduced by Senator Gulick. And so we started looking at the issue again. The bill is introduced, set up in a pretty widespread automatic traffic law enforcement program. It allowed municipalities to do it for red light cameras. It would put it in allow it to be displayed or used in multiple situations throughout the state. We felt, since we had originally wanted to focus on work zones, the agency felt like that was the best place to start, given the report, that we shrunk the bill down just back to where we had been a couple of years prior to that, which was a test program just in work zones, just for about a little over a year, and to use that test program to learn what we could, see if we could follow the recommendations in the report, and just learn from that. The benefit of that kind of 2-year delay in this process was that 2 other states did their own test programs of speed cameras in work zones, both Pennsylvania and Connecticut. We heard from Connecticut. Connecticut said they based their program on Pennsylvania. We're basing this program on Connecticut. We took good testimony from the folks, the Connecticut Agency of Transportation. They issued their own report about their test program, which was the same as this one, is that it's operated by a third party and only in work zones. And they had a lot of good data about the impact, the benefit of speed cameras in work zones to lower crashes and speed. And we did look at, is this still a problem of speeding in work zones? In 2022, the data we provided, there was 398 crashes in work zones. Oh no, that's the total for multiple years. There's 32 crashes in work zones, 32 crashes in work zones in 2022, 8 injuries. And the agency did some speed testing. These weren't cameras. This was just testing the speed, average speed of cars traveling through 2 different work zones. In 2022, they did one in Richmond, and 75% of the vehicles were going over the work zone speed limit, which is 55 miles an hour, and 17% of the vehicles were average over speed over 65, so over the 10 miles per hour. And then in 2023, they did another test in Springfield on I-91, and 85% of the vehicles were going over the speed limit, and 60% were going over 10 miles over the speed limit. So we saw that there was a problem that still needed to be addressed. We feel that a test program of speed cameras in work zones is going to provide us beneficial information on, is this an effective way to lower speeds, lower crashes, provide more safety for the workers and for the traveling public in these work zones. So that's the kind of background. I will now give you the section by section of the bill. Section 1 creates a new title in 23 for automated law enforcement. Subsection 1605 adds definitions. These are definitions that were already in statute, that was from the automatic license plate reader statute, but we're putting them in here. We have a couple new ones, like we clarify what an owner of the vehicle is. We clarify what a recorded images is. These are on page 1309 and 1311. You'll see in a later section where we strike those out from other parts of statute, so we can combine them in this part. In subsection 1606, title 23, this is a new statute that's going to basically govern the creation and the operation of an automatic traffic law enforcement systems. And we say that they would be done by a third party on contract with our agency of transportation. And this section 1606 would be immediately repealed. If AOT can't get this federal grant, they're confident that they would be able to get it, but if they can't, then this is all repealed. So they would not have the authority to do this program if they don't get the federal funding to do it. they're predicting a grant of $1 million. There would be a 10% match of state funds for that highway safety grant. Subsection A would identify the use of the ATLEs as intended to improve road crew safety and reduce traffic crashes. There is some wording in this section that was from the original bill. So we have an amendment from the members of the committee that I'll talk to later. This is one of those amendments that we're striking out some of the original language when the bill is introduced. Subsection B would require the Agency of Transportation to enter a contract with a third-party vendor to operate this. This is the way other states have done this. There's third-party vendors that have the staff and the training and the expertise to deploy these systems, particularly since we're doing it just as a test pilot for a short amount of time. Subsection C would limit the use of ATLE to work zones on limited access highways under the AOT's jurisdiction, as selected by the Agency of Transportation in consultation with the Department of Public Safety. And there's a list on page 1312 of some of the other identified parameters of where these cameras will be able to be deployed. Subsection D would require the vendor to maintain a daily log of the cameras. There's a part in this that talks about the vendor maintaining this data in perpetuity. That's part of the amendment later. We thought that was a little long, so we're shortening that down into being conforming other timeframes for such record retention. Subsection E would require an annual calibration of the system. Subsection F would impose the civil penalties. And as I said, these were required that we have civil penalties to get the federal money to run the test program. These are on page 1312 and 1313. The first violation will be a $0 violation. It's still considered a violation, but that's going to be $0. And then the second, $80, a third, and subsequent, $160. And one thing that we added for what counts as the second violation, it has to be 30 days after the first one. We didn't want to have a situation where somebody was going through a work zone every day to and from work, and then maybe getting 10 violations, but before they even got the first one in the mail. And so already racking up all these fines when they didn't really know that there was a speed camera there. So we're trying to be as accommodating as we can for those people that first get the $0, and then we're not going to hit you with these subsequent fines until you've already been notified that that's what's happening in that area. Moving on to subsection G, this would provide a process and criteria for issuing the civil violations. It makes it clear like how much time they have to mail out these violations, whether you're an in-state driver or an out-of-state driver. And subsection H, these are two defenses to a civil complaint issued under the section. So there's two different ones that we say, if you were to get one of these civil violations in the mail, you could basically get out of it by one of these two defenses. One, you just have to say that the motor vehicle or the plates were in the custody of another person at the time. So if you weren't driving the vehicle, you're the owner of the vehicle because you're registered in your name. So they will send the civil violation to the address on file of the owner of the vehicle. But if you weren't driving it, all you have to do is say, I wasn't driving it. Somebody else was driving it. You don't even have to say who it is. You just say it wasn't you. And that is a defense to not have to pay the fine. Or you can say that the ATLE's radar was not properly calibrated or tested as is required. And that's why we have the daily log information so that somebody could verify that it was properly calibrated and tested at the time that the image was taken of their. Subsection I would lay out the process for governing the civil violation complaint issued under the section before the Judicial Bureau. Subsection J would require the vendor to retain these recorded images for no more than 12 months. There was concern that we heard from ACLU and others about not retaining this information longer than was necessary. Deal with that in that section. Subsection K would require the Department of Public Safety in consultation with transportation to review and report annually to the legislative committees. This is just like on the ATLE system. At subsection L, this is on page 1315, would place limits on the use of the ATLE system and the ability to access the recorded images. In the bill, as passed out of committee, there was an exemption from public records requests so that the images in the ATL system would be exempt. So we heard from the chair of government ops, they're concerned about such exemptions from public records requests. We looked into it. The state of Pennsylvania did have this exemption for public records requests. We couldn't find out exactly why, but we did find out that Connecticut did not. And we couldn't find in ourselves in our discussion a good reason to exempt these images from public records. So we are, in our amendment that we'll talk about later, we're taking that out. So they would no longer be exempt from the public records request. Subsection M would authorize the AOT to adopt rules, but not require it. In 1607, this is all amended language of existing language about the language we had in statute about license plate recognition systems. So we delete the definitions because we're putting them in other sections. It would make clarifying amendments to the remainder of the statute to conform to the new subsection 1606 we created for the ATLE system. 1608 is about preservation of data and makes non-substantive changes to 1608 to conform. Section 2 of the bill is what puts in Title 4, makes it clear that the Judicial Bureau has jurisdiction over ATLE violations. Section 3 is an implementation and kind of outreach plan. This would require AOT to develop this plan, secure the funding. We put the dates of when this test program will run from July of 2025 to October of 2026. So this program can't start before July of 2025. The agency felt like they would need that much time to apply for the grant, get permission to spend the money, then put an RFP to get a vendor, select the vendor, and get it all started. That's described in section 3. Section 4 through section 7 are all repeals of prospective repeals, and things of that nature. There's current repeal of the automatic license plate statutes for July 1st of 2024 this year. So that was an existing statute that if we get to July 1st, 2024, all the license plate statutes would be deleted. Then you wouldn't be able to use automatic license plate readers. We repeal that prospective repeal because we're using some of that statutory language. We amend that. So we repeal that so it doesn't happen this year so that we can use that language. And that repeal happens depending on whether they get the federal grant. So if they don't get the federal grant, repeals in 25. If they do get the federal grant, it goes all the way to July 1st of 2027. Section 6 deals with some other definitions and is impacted either way on the repeals. And then section 7 keeps in statute the prohibition use of automated law enforcement. So this makes sure that when we repeal the other sections, this would still remain so that going forward in 2027 or 2025, if they don't get the grant, it would be prohibited for law enforcement or anybody. We've heard from municipalities that want to use this even outside of law enforcement would be prohibited from using license plate readers. So we would, if it's in 2027, we would have the results of this test program, and then we could decide as a legislature at that point whether we want to keep automated law enforcement or not. Then it takes us to the effective dates. Section 1 and 2 start in July of 2025 when we expect the projects, the test program to start. Section 6 and 7 start depending on if they get the grant or not, 25 or 27. And the remainder sections 3, 4, 5, and 8 become effective on passage. The vote of the bill out of committee was 5-0-0.
Thank you, Senator from Washington. S-184 also made stops
Finance and Appropriations Committee. For the report on the Committee of Finance, I would Senator from Chittenden Southeast, Senator Chip.
Thank you, Mr. President. So your Senate Finance Committee considered this bill and considered a note from the Joint Fiscal Office, which estimated this bill to have a de minimis impact on state revenues. Your Committee on Finance voted this 5-0-2.
Thank you, Senator. For the report from the Committee on Appropriations, I recognize Senator Burke.
Thank you, Mr. President. Your Committee on Appropriations reviewed this bill for appropriations impact on the general fund. We also found that that impact would be de minimis. As we said, the agency is going to get a federal grant, but there would be a 10% match for that federal grant. But this is within the budget of the Agency of Transportation Safety Program. So we were supportive of that on a vote of 5-1-1.
And Senator, I believe you have an amendment to offer at this time?
Yes, Mr. President. Thank you for bringing that up.
That would be page 1324 in today's calendar.
1324 is the page number of this amendment that's brought to you by all the members of the Transportation Committee. The first instance of amendment is, if you want to check back to the language, it's on page 1310. We realized after passing out of committee that in a definition, we said that a recorded image was an image of a vehicle traveling 5 miles per hour over the speed limit. But then later we talked about the civil violation being 10 miles an hour over. So we wanted to have the definition of the recorded image and what we're saying is a violation to match. So we're changing it from 5-10. The second instance of amendment is on affects language on page 1311. This was I referred to earlier. The bill is introduced kind of had a different purpose than the pilot program that we're talking about. So we took out some of that language about the original purpose and made it clear that the purpose was to investigate the benefits of automatic law enforcement for speeding violations to reach the safety goals that I talked about. The third instance of amendment, also on page 1311, this had talked about that the public safety had to determine that it was impractical or unsafe to use traditional law enforcement methods. Again, this was language from the underlying bill as introduced, which really didn't pertain to when we moved it to a test program. So we deleted all that language and we didn't need any other language to replace it with. The fourth and fifth instances of amendment, I pointed out that we had talked about keeping data in perpetuity by the vendor. We didn't think we needed to keep it that long. There's a real cost, technical issues when you have to keep that long. So we changed that to be in conformity with other record retention requirements for not fewer than 3 years in both of those fourth and fifth instances of amendment. In the sixth instance of amendment, this is why I've mentioned on this thing, this is on page 1315. That is where there was an exemption to public records request. We're striking that whole section, which had an A and B section, because we're not making it exempt. So we didn't need that. So that was the amendment. The amendment was, there wasn't a vote on amendment because it was all members of the committee. One thing I forgot on the presentation of the bill or of the report, the committee's report, was our list of witnesses. So I just quickly, we had 15 witnesses on this. We had the sponsor, Senator LaRoque Gulick. We had Mark Anderson from the Sheriff's Association. We had Michelle Boomhauer, Agency of Transportation, Christopher Brickle from the Vermont Criminal Justice Council, Susanna Davis from the Office of Racial Equity, Office of Legislative Counsel. We had both our prior legislative counsel, Anthea Dexter Cooper, and Donna Russo Savage took over afterwards. And we had Chuck Farmer from the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety. The Institute for Highway Safety is promoting states to do this because they found it does reduce crashes and increase safety. We had Elizabeth Keys from the Connecticut Department of Transportation on their program. Christopher Kinn from the Ohio State Ohio State Highway Patrol, Lieutenant Sean Lone for Vermont State Police. I think we also had Lieutenant Howard talk about this unofficially, but he spoke about it when he was in the committee on something else. Lou Miller from Vera Mobility. This was the vendor that did the Pennsylvania program. Falco Schilling from ACLU, Andy Worcester from the Department of Public Safety, and definitely not least, because he came in twice, was Judge Zone, the Chief Superior Judge of the Vermont Judiciary. So with that, that is the report of the amendment, Mr. President. Thank you.
Question now is, shall the report of the Committee on Transportation be amended as offered by the senator from Washington and others? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. You have amended the report of the Committee on Transportation as offered by the senator from Washington and others. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Transportation as amended? Are you ready for the question? Senator from Chilean Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to offer my thanks to the Vice Chair of the Committee on Transportation, who has taken on a great deal of extra work over the last few weeks and done an exemplary job. Speaking to this particular bill, I've had a concern for years about automated surveillance systems, license plate readers, but now these cameras in work zones. I have shared those concerns with the Vice Chair of Transportation and indicated to him that I'm willing to vote for this particular use in work zones. I think that's limited. It's clearly necessary because we've had some close calls and some more than close calls in work zones. But what I also tried to express is that it is my hope this is not perceived or meant as a pilot program for statewide use, because I would oppose such a program. But if it remains limited in the way outlined here, I think it will be of use and within our proper scope. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. As a member of the Transportation Committee, a couple of things that I would just like to add, and that is we are talking about first and foremost safety. This is not in any way an attempt to raise revenue. And we are also talking about people are thinking, oh, are we trying to do something to entrap motorists? So I would just bring to your attention, before you even hit a work zone, you will be told that there is a camera in operation. So if you are going to proceed, when you have advance notice, it's like saying radar ahead, slow down, and you decide not to slow down, then obviously there's a desire to make sure that a vehicle going into these work areas, and to hear from a family member of someone who was struck and what it's like when these vehicles are going 60, 70. I think we even had testimony from Connecticut. Somebody had blown through a safety of work area at over 80 miles an hour. So we are talking about safety and protection of very vulnerable workers. And it's a matter of saying, please, we're giving you notice. This is a work area. There is going to be a camera. And you can see a zero assessment the first time. All is designed really to protect. So I know there was concern. What if somebody is driving my car? What about this? Are you really trying to do something to make our lives miserable? And I guess I would just like to say, we were very conscious of this. We're very conscious about any bias. You can see we took testimony in that area. There was agreement that putting this in work areas certainly would not in any way create that kind of concern. So I just wanted to point out those other aspects, because I do believe there are probably issues that people might come to mind or be concerned about. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Franklin on the screen. Senator from Washington is interrogated as the reporter of the bill.
Mr. President, I certainly appreciate the committee's work on this and their concern for safety. Having been involved in many work zones during the course of my career, but my question is on page 1314. Under it states that a owner of the motor vehicle on the defenses shall simply state that he or she was not operating the vehicle or the radar wasn't calibrated at the time that the alleged offense occurred. Is that just to simply keep the operator, the owner name off motor vehicle records along with, for insurance purposes, there's still a fine involved in this? I just need a little more explanation on that.
Yeah, you're correct. that These are the two defenses that the owner, when they get the violation in the mail, can return to the Judicial Bureau. It is to deal with the issue of, it could be, we're only taking an image of the rear of the vehicle. So you just know the license plate number. You don't have an image of the person driving or anything like that. So if the owner of the vehicle wasn't driving, then you can't assess a civil penalty to that person. That's another reason why we don't have anything here. There's no points off your license. It's very different than a speeding violation issued by an officer where you could have points and it would go on your record. This is more attuned to a parking ticket. It just sent to the owner based on the registration, based on the license plate. And which I think the main reason we're doing that is for simplicity, for administrative simplicity, because you do not know who's driving it since you're not an officer there on scene. And so that's why the first one is you just say, I wasn't driving it. And for a test program, one of the things we want to learn is how many people are going to make that attestation? How many people are going to challenge these? Kind of what's the impact of these defenses? The radar component, I think if somebody says that the radar wasn't properly calibrated or tested, we could go back and look at the daily log and see if that's true or not. I think that would be something that the officer might show up at the Judicial Bureau hearing and say, no, it was. But the first one, I don't expect that the officer would try to argue against someone making that claim that they weren't the driver of the vehicle. I don't know if, hopefully that answers your question.
Mr. President, is this just for first offenses?
These defenses could be used for multiple, it could be used for the second or the third offense.
Thank you, member. So I haven't looked at this, Mr. President. I'm sure that if I was one of those individuals, which I'm not going to be, obviously, but I would probably use this defense on a daily basis. Does not mean I'm not supporting this bill, but it just seems to be a very weak section of the bill. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you for that, Mr. President. I just, in response, we did talk about this a little bit in committee about what the impact would be if, because also there's the issue if you sort of like a parking ticket, what if you don't pay it? It doesn't have the same impact as a speeding ticket issued by an officer. But this is another thing that we're hoping to learn from a test program. Like, how often are people just still getting a recorded image, but just always sending back that they weren't the driver? So that's something that we're going to learn, and we're going to report back to us, and we'll let you know in a couple of years. Well, at least somebody will let you know in a couple of years. Whoever's here.
Senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to probably echo some of the words of the pro tem. When we first started talking about this bill, I was very honest with our vice chair and said, I don't know that if I can ever get there to this bill, but in giving recognition to the vice chair, we kept on bringing in witnesses and witnesses and witnesses, and we worked really well as a committee together. And lo and behold, here I am going to vote yes on this bill. And the reason I can vote yes comes down to how hard the committee worked on it, but also that it wasn't something to just go out there and penalize drivers. It was the efforts to slow down drivers in the speed zones where the workers are most vulnerable. But I think the tipping point for me is when the state police had come in and they just said, this is a tool that we need to keep Vermonters safer. And combined with that it wasn't punitive, it was really a safety measure. It's a test pilot. As the senator from Franklin pointed out, there might be some holes here or there. It's for a year. It's not costing the state much money to find out a vast amount of knowledge of how we can stay safe. And I will be voting yes on this bill.
Senator from Chittenden Central.
Since I was the lead sponsor on this bill, to say a few things. The genesis of this bill came to me from some of my neighbors in Burlington who were feeling unsafe and were very concerned about their children. We have a lot of neighborhood schools in Burlington. We're fairly tightly packed. And you may have read that we also have fewer police in our city right now. So they were feeling as though drivers were capitalizing on that and driving unsafely and too fast. So I am a little disappointed that the original intent of the bill, which was to give municipalities the option of using this technology, is no longer in the bill. That said, I will certainly support it. And I hope that someday in the future, we can look more deeply into using this technology to, as my colleague from Caledonia and Essex said, keep people safe. Thank you.
I believe the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Or no, not yet. Shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Transportation as amended? My apologies. I'll restate the question. Shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Transportation as amended? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Transportation as amended. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of S 184. We now have up for consideration S 192. S 192 was referred to Committee on Health and Welfare, which considered the same, recommends that when the bill is amended, the bill ought to pass. The bill is then referred to the Committee on Appropriations, which also considered the same, and recommends that when the bill is amended, the bill ought to pass. Please listen to the second reading of the bill.
S 192, an act relating to forensic facility admissions criteria and processes.
Now you've heard the second reading of the bill for the report of the Committee on Health and Welfare, the Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill has been sitting on the calendar for a while, and it is a little bit complicated, but my committee has said, please do it quickly. So I'm going to try and do the balance between the complicated and the quick. And I'd be happy to answer questions certainly as we go forward. We all know that there have been some very, very horrible murders in our state in the past few years. Burlington, Brattleboro, and Bennington. And the commitment of those crimes have been by people who either have been declared not guilty when they've stood trial. So they've been declared not guilty by reason of insanity. And then we also know that there are conditions where these murders have been caused by someone who has a mental health issue or an intellectual disability and has been declared incompetent to stand trial. But when you have such a serious crime of murder, something, for example, that would result in life in prison, then we don't really have a good place for these folks who have a mental illness or an intellectual disability. What they need is a secure forensic facility, a place where they can be committed for care that would provide the ability to achieve competency and some therapeutic services for them. So this bill is related to the forensic facility that we have talked about for the past couple of years, and the placement of folks with an intellectual disability or mental health issue where they have committed a serious crime and been declared to be incompetent to stand trial, or folks who would also have been adjudicated as not guilty have a mental, and have been declared not guilty because of their insanity. So we did hear from, so the bill is about due process. It's about due process for these very few individuals with a mental health disorder or an intellectual disability when they've committed a significant crime and are incompetent to stand trial or have been tried and found not guilty by reason of insanity. And I'm emphasizing that because it can get confusing about the folks we're talking about. So, and the result is for those folks is they might be placed in a forensic facility with treatment. Jail is not a place for these people. We don't have the staff, we don't have the programs, we don't have the support for people with intellectual disabilities in particular, or for folks with mental illness to have them recover their competency or to help them through their illness. So a secure facility that is a therapeutic, community therapeutic facility in this state, it would be a secure forensic facility. The mental health process has been in place for a while when folks are tried and the mental illness has been treated. We understand that there can be some involuntary medical treatment. We understand there's counseling and folks can be brought back into competency. But for folks with intellectual disabilities, those with a 70 IQ or less, they cannot be brought back into competency as easily. There's one method called the Staler method that can help people achieve some behavioral change and can be brought back to a level, but it's difficult and it requires some very specialized training. So placing some of the folks with intellectual disability into a forensic facility will be, a secure facility will be important. Last year, your Committee on Health and Welfare spent some time talking about this issue. We declared that we needed a place where there's treatment. And then in conjunction with the House, the other body, we put together a working group to look at folks with an intellectual disability. It's known as the Act 27 Working Group, to look at folks with an intellectual disability who have committed this crime, a significant crime, and then how would they be given due process and be placed into a secure forensic facility. The chair of Judiciary and I served on that working group, and it was a long, difficult process. So I don't want you to think as we go through this that it was a simple decision about how to provide due process for the folks that we're talking about. Similarly, we did at the time we were looking at folks with intellectual disability, we did look at, as we completed our work, we looked at the comparison between what's available right now with folks with a mental health disorder, and found that there's much more in statute that protects their due process. So we tried to align those two processes, and that is some of what is in the bill. So the commitment of the individual to care for the Department of Mental Health, the commitment of the individual to care for the Department of Aging and Independent Living, the recommitment, if that is going to happen, the placement in a forensic facility, how that happens, what is the role of the court, what is the role of the department, and then the discharge of the individual from placement, from commitment. So all of these things are within the bill. I've talked right now about the individuals who are charged with these serious crimes. Another significant part of the bill is that as we were taking testimony in committee and during the working group, we had victims involved. Two mothers of young people, relatively young people who were killed in our state, who were very concerned about being included and hearing about any commitment, placement, recommitment, or discharge from facilities, so that the family would understand what's happening with the individuals who have been charged or tried for those crimes. So another part of the bill is that. And Mr. President, if I might, as I go through the bill, I would like also to include the proposal amendment that come from all members of the Health and Welfare Committee. It
Let
does
me-
not affect the appropriation piece. I will just highlight the sections that relates to.
You could mention that later there would be an amendment to address that area, but
Yes.
to speak to the amendment would be out of order,
All
unfortunately.
right, I'll just indicate where the amendment might fit as we go forward. So I will go through the bill briefly, even though my committee has said with alacrity, which is one of our favorite words. And I'll try to give it the justice that it's due. So we're talking about people who provide a significant risk of harm to themselves or others if they are not placed in a secure setting. And they're charged with a crime for which there's no right to bail. And those crimes are defined as penalty in life in prison or a felony act of violence with clear and convincing evidence of something, it might be a murder or sexual violence. Clear and convincing is the highest level of evidence that we have. So these are serious crimes for which people are charged. And these folks either are not competent to stand trial, either due to a mental health disorder or intellectual disability. Or these are folks who have committed these crimes and are charged with a crime for which no bail, for which there's no bail, and they're adjudicated not guilty by reason of insanity. So I'm repeating that, but I think it's important that we understand this is very few people. In fact, the folks with intellectual disabilities who are in the public criminal justice system are known as Act 248 individuals, and there's a reason for that. I won't digress, but they're called intellectual disability folks in criminal justice called Act 248. And there are, right now, there are 29 individuals in the state that are involved in criminal justice who have an intellectual disability. One of those would achieve this level here and be sort of eligible for being placed in a secure forensic facility. And similarly, there are very few, maybe 2 or 3 in the state, right? Well, there are others, but current charges for those with mental health disorders. So as you look at the bill, you'll see that there is the legislative intent, and we'll talk about intent a little bit later, but the intent is to allow the commissioners of Department of Aging and Independent Living and the Department of Mental Health to seek treatment and programming for specific individuals in a forensic facility. Section 2 describes the folks who would be potentially placed in a forensic facility. And I've described those to you earlier. Section 3 begins the due process where there's notices of hearing for the commissioners for the mental health or aging and independent living, where there's a commitment hearing, and the commitment hearing, which means that the individual who is now in the criminal justice system, the commitment hearing would have the commissioner of mental health or Dale look to whether or not the individual should be in a forensic facility and then use specific criteria to make that determination. And that one of the determinations is that the individual be placed in the least restrictive setting necessary. So it's not automatic that they're going to a secure forensic facility if they've committed these crimes. Rather, the commissioners and the panel that we'll describe in a minute make a decision that the secure residential facility is the least restrictive place that these individuals would be secured. So there's a whole process that the commissioner goes through with the panel of other commissioners and make a decision about commitment. And then there's a hearing at the court, it begins at the Superior Court, and then the commitment is given. If the commitment is given, that means then that the departments are responsible to care, the custody care and habilitation for these individuals. Then they are placed appropriately in the least restrictive setting appropriate to their care. So section 4 modifies existing language regarding placement, commitment and placement and treatment. And so it's important within this section that the treatment for the individual can only be made appropriately in the forensic facility. We've added a section, the Committee on Senate Health and Welfare has made a suggestion in section 4C2B, Roman numeral little two, that adds some conditions around notice to victims, and that the victims, when an individual is going to be committed to the forensic facility, or that there will be some discharge from the forensic facility, that the individual, the victim and the victim's family can provide a victim's impact statement. This is for the mental health folks. Mental illness is something that does have some clinical information and health information. So allowing for the individual family to provide an impact statement does not require that any clinical or healthcare information is revealed about the individual, and that is protective under HIPAA. Section 5 really adds the definition of the forensic facility that I've talked a little bit about. And it's really important that it be considered as a therapeutic community residence. It's a place where people go to receive help while they are also being kept in custody and care and habilitation of the various, one of the other departments. So Department of Mental Health in the first case would provide for support and services, and the care for those with intellectual disability would provide the appropriate services. Section 6 relates to the application for continued treatment. Once the court makes a determination that the individual belongs in a forensic facility, there's a 90-day period within which the individual or the individual's lawyer, could be legal aid, makes a request after 90 days that there be a reconsideration of their placement in the forensic facility. And so then if there's a recommitment, it would continue, it could continue, or they could be released. Notice would be given to the victims. But at the same time, if they're replaced into the forensic facility, they would continue to receive treatment. And so there's another hearing on continued treatment. There's also a hearing as we talk about mental health folks for, there's an application for involuntary medication. Mental health, people with mental health disorders may very well be returned to some level of competency as a result of involuntary medical treatment. And in that case, then if they were returned to competency, then they could be continued through the court system. Section 8A has some clarification of language related to involuntary medication. And this does talk about if the individual becomes competent, the order is no longer in effect, and that's the involuntary treatment order. That is in the amendment that we can talk about later. Section 9 begins the section on folks with intellectual disabilities. So the section we just taught, all those sections we just talked about, is the due process for folks with mental illness. and includes a 90-day window to look at whether or not they should remain in the forensic facility, and then a 1-year period that they would be in the forensic facility, and then another opportunity to review whether or not they should continue in that community therapy program and in the forensic facility. Section 9 begins the commitment of Dale and the judicial process for folks with intellectual disabilities, and that their placement would be in the least restrictive setting possible, and that if it is in the, it could be in a secure forensic facility. And then we've made some changes to section 18 VSA 8840 and 8843, language changes that are in the bill determine that we no longer require those sections of bill. And so that's really some technical corrections. And then we've also looked at, put language in on legal competence, specifying that a determination that an individual is in need of continued custody, that means that they have to be under the oversight of the Commissioner of Dale, custody, care, and habilitation. This does not lead to a presumption of legal incompetence. Incompetences would be considered different, so there are two separate processes going on, and we won't want to make it too complicated. So for folks who are being placed in a forensic facility, there is an 1888-45, which continues in the section that we're in, section 10, that specifies that they could be placed in the forensic facility. And again, the judicial process that goes on, the rules of evidence apply here, and it's again clear and convincing evidence that they do belong in the forensic facility. And the commitment is ordered in the least restrictive environment for up to 1 year. But before the 1 year happens, there's a 90-day review for the individual with the intellectual disability and a determination of whether or not they should continue within that forensic facility. Just to stop here for a second, because folks who have a mental illness may recover within a 90-day period if they're given involuntary medication or other treatment. Folks who have intellectual disability, as I mentioned before, it's very difficult to return them, to get them to be a level of competency to understand that they might go through a trial process. So 90 days is a window to look, but we may or not see any recovery at that point. Then they are committed, they will be left at the forensic facility for a year. And they would then, after the year, they could ask to have, they would have an automatic, the court would automatically have a reevaluation of their placement. The initial placement for these folks is by Superior Court, criminal court, and then subsequently they're treated within family court. So any recommitment or replacement would happen within the family court. There's also within this section, this is a long section and I understand that, but that's the way our statutes work. There's also in this section an opportunity for victim participation, and that happens after, when there may be a discharge from a commitment or placement in the forensic facility. And we've added some language in our proposed amendment that adds the 90-day review within the criminal division, because the criminal court places them first, and so the criminal court would be the place where the review would take place. After that, then when they are subsequently placed in the family court jurisdiction, then the family court would deal with any discharge. When a person is subject to judicial review under this whole section, and they're placed in a forensic facility, The prosecutor, the victim, or both may file a petition with the court as an interested person concerning whether the person's discharge from or placement at a forensic facility is appropriate. So this language allows for the victim to have some opportunity to review the placement. And in particular, if there's going to be a discharge or from the placement, this would happen. And there are some timeframes for this to happen. So there's victim notice information here, and there's also a notice of pending administrative discharge, and which would then there could be a hearing at the family division of the Superior Court within 10 days of the request by the victim or others. Then there are some other more or less boilerplate judicial review information, section 11. So that was all section 10. Section 11 removes the sunset that allows forensic psychologists to complete competency examinations. Last year, we passed into a statute with a sunset allowing for forensic psychologists to bring folks or to complete competency exams. And now we are taking that sunset off and allowing for that to continue because we have one forensic psychiatrist in the state, and this expands that workforce to forensic psychologists. And then we have some rulemaking. Oh, in section 12, we have, oh, this is important. Section 12 is a report on competency restoration. Some states have what's known as a competency restoration program, where people who are with perhaps intellectual disability or mental illness go through a program. Some of them are quite large and quite expensive, to determine how to return them to competency so that they can stand trial. Vermont doesn't have that, and we asked for a report that will come back to us in just a fiscal analysis. We received a long report about competency restoration, but we didn't get the fiscal analysis, and now we have that coming back to us in November. There's also a section 13 on rulemaking and some conforming amendments, and then the effective dates for rulemaking and the competency sections in particular, and then also for the other policy changes that are in the bill that are very important to a number of people in our state. The folks who look after individuals with disabilities, or folks who look after folks with mental illness, are very concerned about what's in the bill and wanting to ensure that the due process is there. It is there. We think we've done an adequate job on that. But there are also folks who are very interested in ensuring that the forensic facility is a therapeutic community where treatment is available by experts who can do that, in particular for those with intellectual disabilities. There's not a whole lot of people who can deal with what's known as the Staler method that I mentioned before. And the other group that's really significantly interested in this bill are the victims. And I can't stress that enough. After we completed the bill, we thought we had everything there, and we heard from a victim's mother and said, I don't think you have the mental health victim ability to weigh in appropriately in the bill. And we agreed, we didn't. So we've added that into the amendment that I'll mention later. So what generated this bill were those horrible events in my district, when it was my district, in Burlington, where an individual was killed and the person who committed the crime was declared not guilty by reason of insanity. And so where do we put people like this? The answer is a secure facility that has some treatment. And so this is about doing that. This is not, this is placing an individual with an intellectual disability or with a mental illness, severe mental illness, at risk to harm and others, causing harm to self and others. That's not a place. Jail is not the place. So there are a number of people who brought us information that was extremely helpful as we completed the bill. We have a long list of witnesses. Susan Aronoff, Senior Planner and Policy Analyst for the Vermont Developmental Disabilities Council. Karen Barber, General Counsel of Department of Mental Health. Kelly Carroll, her daughter was killed in Bennington. Pat Frawley, Director of Vermont Crisis Intervention Network. Susan Garcia Nofi, Staff Attorney, Vermont Legal Aid, Disability Law Project. Emily Hawes, Commissioner of Department of Mental Health. Marie Lawlier, Developmental Services, Director, Vermont Care Partners. Jack McCullough, Project Director, Mental Health Law Project. Mary Graham McDowell, Director of Developmental Services, Rutland Mental Health. Rutland Mental Health. Katie McClin, Ledge Council. Lindsay Owen, Executive Director, Disability Rights Vermont. Jennifer Pullman, Executive Director, Center for Crime Victim Services. Stuart Shore, General Counsel, Department of Disabilities, Aging and Independent Living. Rebecca Cybernagel, Principal Assistant, Department of Dale. Megan Tierney Ward, Interim Commissioner, Department of Dale. And Joanne Corton Nick, her sister was killed in Burlington. And those folks, in addition to all the folks who worked on the Act 27 working group over the summer and the fall, and it was an intense process, helped us develop the bill. And I would ask that the committee support it. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Bill is
Not the
under
committee, the Senate. I always do that. I don't know, we're a committee of the whole.
The bill is then referred to Committee on Appropriations, which considered the same. And for the report of the Committee on Appropriations, Senator from Chittenden, South.
So thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, Committee Appropriations was concerned about the language and the intent, which indicated that we would have a forensic facility authorized and operational beginning July 1st, 2025. And then we realized that that's not happening. So that second sentence under legislative intent has been struck by the Committee on Appropriations. And then the rulemaking process pushed out to November rather than in August. So those two proposals of amendment by your Committee on Appropriations.
The current question is, shall the Senate adopt the report of the Committee on Health and Welfare? Is the Senator's amendment to that report or to the bill? Oh, excuse me. The appropriation report has to be voted upon. So question is, shall the report of the Committee on Health and Welfare be amended as offered by the Committee on Appropriations? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. And the report of the Committee on Health and Welfare has been amended as offered by the Committee on Appropriations. I'm now double checking as to the next amendment. Yes, the Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Thank you, Mr. President. I did refer to these as I went through the bill, but I'll go through it again. So our first proposal of amendment is within section 4, and its findings in order around persons with mental illness. And it adds a section that provides a victim with notice of discharge from commitment generally, or from discharge from a hospital, secure residential recovery facility, or forensic facility, and the right to submit a victim impact statement to the family division, either through the prosecutor, through the prosecutor for the victim. So this could be the victim's family doing that. the reason we add, as I mentioned earlier, a victim impact statement is that it would be inappropriate for disclosure of clinical healthcare information. So it doesn't allow for that information to be a part of the discussion by the victim. That's the first proposal of amendment. Second proposal of amendment is in section 6, 7, 8. Section 8. And it was an addition of 8A. And this adds a new section. If the court finds that without an order for involuntary medication, there's a substantial probability that the individual would continue to refuse medication and as a result would pose a significant a danger of harm to self or others, the court may order administration of medication at a forensic facility for up to 90 days or longer if necessary. And then if the individual becomes competent, the order is no longer in effect. Then we have the third proposal of amendment, which is in section 10. And this is with regard to discharge from a commitment or placement at a forensic facility. And so when the individual is initially placed into the facility, it's by the criminal division of the Superior Court. So this allows for that initial 90-day review to happen by the criminal division of the Superior Court. That's it. And so I think that is it for the proposed amendment. Thank you, Mr. President.
So the question is, shall the report of the Committee on Health and Welfare as amended be further amended as offered by the Senator from Chittenden Southeast? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have further amended the report of the Committee on Health and Welfare. The question now is, shall the bill be amended as offered by the Committee on Health and Welfare as amended? Are you ready for that question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have amended the bill as offered by the Committee on Health and Welfare as amended. The question now is, shall the bill be read a third time? Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it, and you have ordered third reading of S-192. Senator from Chittenden Central.
Thank you, Mr. President. We had promised the money committees that we would stop as near to 1 o'clock as possible. So with that, Mr. President, I will move that pending announcement, the Senate stand in adjournment until 9:30 a.m. Tuesday, March 26th.
Now, Senator, are there any announcements? Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Finance will meet at 1:30. Bring your lunch.
Senator from Caledonia.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Appropriations will meet immediately, grab lunch, and we'll eat while we take up bills. So we are scheduled to start at 1:15. I would hope that we could grab lunch and be there at 1:20, and we'll get started. Thank you.
Senator from Madison.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate Government Operations will meet at 2 o'clock.
Senator from Essex.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senate institutions meet at 1:30.
Senator from Chittenden Southeast.
Mr. President, as an announcement, I just want to make sure everybody knows that at 7:05 p.m. tonight, a team of Catamounts will be upsetting the Blue Devils. And I just want to simply say, go Cats.
And why did you wear a blue shirt and a blue tie today?
Mr. President, I forgot.
I'm wondering whether that should be entered into the record. No, the senator from Chittenden Central has moved that the Senate now stand adjournment until Tuesday, March 26th at 9:30 a.m. Are you ready for the question? If so, all those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed indicate by saying nay. The ayes have it. And the Senate, once people stop mumbling and talking to each other on the floor of the Senate, will be adjourned until Tuesday, March 26th at 9:30 a.m.